On Christmas Eve, outside a crowded military charity gala, a tired father carrying his young daughter was stopped at the entrance and accused of trying to sneak in for free food. Security mocked him. Guests filmed him. They threatened to call the police while his child clung to him in silence. But when a Navy admiral walked past and noticed something hidden inside the man's worn jacket, everything changed. What he saw made him freeze in shock, because that faded patch revealed a truth that would force an entire crowd to their knees. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories like this move you, consider subscribing. This is what happened next. The weathered pickup truck pulled into the overflow parking lot with a cough and a sputter, its cracked taillight casting fractured red light across the snow-dusted pavement. Through the frost-edged windshield, the harborside grand estate glowed like something out of a dream, all chandeliers and golden light spilling from tall windows, where silhouettes in evening gowns and dress uniforms moved in elegant patterns. Christmas Eve had turned the coastal New England mansion into a postcard, complete with luminarias lining the cobblestone drive and the distant sound of a string quartet drifting through the cold air. Callum Drexler sat behind the wheel for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at that golden glow. He was a lean man in his mid-30s with gray creeping into his stubble and permanent shadows under his eyes that no amount of sleep ever seemed to touch. His hands resting on the steering wheel were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. The faded olive green Carhartt jacket he wore had seen better years, frayed at the cuffs and elbows, with a small hole near the collar that he kept meaning to patch but never did. In the back seat, 6-year-old Bryn slept against her stuffed bear, her dark curls pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass in small rhythmic clouds. She wore an oversized pink coat that was already too small for her growing frame, and her shoes were clean but worn, the kind you found at discount stores and stretched as far as they would go. Cal watched her in the rearview mirror, his expression softening in a way it rarely did anymore. He reached across to the glove compartment and pulled out a crumpled invitation, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. It was addressed to him by name, printed on heavy cardstock with an embossed seal from the New England Veterans Coalition. Below his name, in smaller text, it read, Civilian Contractor Liaison. He had stared at those words for 3 days before deciding to come. On the passenger seat sat a sealed envelope, slightly bent at the corners. In careful handwriting across the front, he had written, In honor of those who didn't come home. Inside was $47 in cash, mostly singles and fives, and a handwritten note on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. It was not much. It never felt like enough. Cal exhaled slowly, his breath clouding in the cab's interior. Just drop it off. 10 minutes. That was all he needed. Leave the envelope, pay his respects, and get back to Bryn before she fully woke up and started asking questions he did not know how to answer. He gently shook her shoulder. Bryn blinked awake, confused and disoriented, her small face creasing with sleep. Is Mommy here? She asked, her voice thick with dreams. Cal's throat tightened. He did not answer, could not answer, just lifted her into his arms and stepped out into the December cold. Bryn wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against his shoulder, still half asleep, trusting him the way only children can trust. The walk from the overflow lot to the main entrance felt longer than it was. Cal's work boots crunched on gravel and then cobblestone as he approached the red-carpeted walkway where valets in neat uniforms directed luxury vehicles into careful rows. He kept to the side, trying to be invisible, just wanting to reach the door and complete his small mission without drawing attention. But before he could reach the entrance, a broad-shouldered security guard stepped into his path, one hand raised in a stopping gesture. The man wore a black suit with an earpiece, his face set in professional neutrality that quickly shifted to something harder as he took in Cal's appearance. Whoa, hold up. This is a private event. Cal stopped, adjusting Bryn's weight in his arms. I know, I was invited. The security guard, whose name tag read Todd, looked him up and down with the kind of practiced assessment that took in every detail at once. The worn jacket, the salt-stained work boots, the child clinging to his neck, the absence of any vehicle parked at valet. His expression hardened into something like certainty. Invited guests check in at valet. You walked from the back lot. I just need 2 minutes. I'm dropping off a donation for the memorial fund. Cal kept his voice calm, steady, the way he had learned to do when people made assumptions. My name is on the list, Callum Drexler. Todd pulled out a tablet, scrolling through it with exaggerated slowness. He frowned, scrolled back up, then down again. Don't see you. Check under contractors, or civilian liaisons. Todd's eyes flicked up from the screen, something like irritation crossing his face. He keyed his radio. Yeah, I've got a situation at the north entrance. Possible crasher. The word crasher hung in the cold air like an accusation. Bryn's arms tightened around Cal's neck. He could feel her small body tensing, picking up on the shift in atmosphere the way children do, sensing danger even when they don't understand its source. Movement near the entrance drew more attention. A small group of gala attendees had drifted toward the commotion, champagne flutes in hand, curious about the disturbance. A woman in a pearl necklace and an elegant black dress pulled out her phone, angling it toward Cal and Todd. Her name was Felicity Granger, though Cal would not learn that until later, and her expression held the kind of fascinated amusement people get when witnessing something they consider beneath them. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough to be heard clearly. "Is he trying to crash?" A silver-haired man in an expensive suit shook his head, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to being listened to. "This is exactly why we need better security protocols at these events." A young officer in dress whites, eager and fresh-faced, stepped forward. "Want me to help, Todd?" Cal kept his eyes forward, refusing to look at the gathering crowd, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. Bryn had gone very still against his shoulder, her face buried in his neck. He could feel her trembling. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back from the entrance. I'm not causing trouble." Cal's voice remained steady, but something in his chest was tightening, an old familiar feeling of being measured and found wanting. "I just want to leave this envelope inside. For the memorial." Felicity's voice cut through again, dripping with performed sympathy. "He says he's donating. Probably thinks there's free food inside." Laughter rippled through the small crowd, polite and cruel in the way only comfortable people can manage. A woman in a fur coat leaned toward her companion, whispering something that made them both smile. Cal felt Bryn's grip tighten even more. He wanted to cover her ears, to shield her from this, but his hands were full holding her weight. She was watching now, her dark eyes wide and unblinking, taking in the faces of the adults around them with the kind of focused attention that would later keep her awake at night. "Should we call the police?" someone asked. Todd nodded slowly, his hand moving toward his radio again. "If you don't leave now, I will." For a moment, Cal considered just walking away. It would be easier. It always was. But he thought about the envelope in his pocket, about the name written on the note inside, about the promise he had made to himself 7 years ago to never forget. He thought about Bryn, about what she was learning right now, about how the world treated people like them. He turned toward Felicity, toward the crowd of well-dressed strangers recording him with their phones and their eyes. "I flew helicopters for the military 7 years ago. I was invited here to honor someone who died. That's all I want to do." Felicity's smile was pitying, the kind reserved for people who tell obvious lies. "Sure you did." More laughter, lighter now, more dismissive. The silver-haired man adjusted his cufflinks. "Everyone says they serve these days." Cal's face went blank, the expression of someone who has stopped expecting to be believed. He turned away from them all, his shoulders tight with controlled emotion. "Come on, kiddo, let's go." As he walked back, toward the parking lot, a gust of wind caught his jacket, flipping the collar open for just a second. Inside the lining, barely visible in the light from the luminarias, was a faded tactical patch. The stitching was crude and old, done by hand with whatever materials were available at the time. The colors had nearly washed out to nothing, dark green and gray blending together, but the letters were still there, if you knew to look for them. "Silent N," the first line read. The rest was obscured by the fold of fabric. Below it, 24D. No one in the crowd noticed. They were already turning back to their conversations, their champagne, their comfortable certainty that they had just prevented an embarrassing situation. But one man noticed. Rear Admiral James Harding had stepped out a side entrance for air, needing a break from the crowded ballroom and the endless cycle of handshakes and small talk. He was in his late 50s with graying temples and a chest full of ribbons and medals that represented 30 years of service. He had lit a cigar, something his doctor told him not to do anymore, and was enjoying the cold bite of December air when he heard the commotion at the front entrance. He glanced over absently, more out of habit than real interest, and saw a man in a worn jacket walking away, a child in his arms. Something about the way the man carried himself caught Harding's attention. The posture, the controlled movement, the way he held the child protectively while moving with purpose. Then the wind caught the jacket, and Harding saw the patch. His cigar slipped from his fingers, falling into the snow with a soft hiss. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It can't be." He took a step forward, then stopped, frozen in place. His hand came up slowly, unconsciously, as if reaching for something that was not there. His eyes locked onto that faded green patch, onto those partial letters that no one else would recognize, that no one else should recognize because that operation had never officially happened. Silent Night, December 24th. Grid X-ray. Harding's heart hammered in his chest. His hands began to shake. The man in the worn jacket reached a rusted pickup truck in the overflow lot. He opened the door and set the child inside, his movements gentle despite the tension visible in his shoulders. Harding could see him kneeling by the open door, could see the child's small hand reaching out to touch his face. Harding's feet were moving before he made the conscious decision, his polished dress shoes crunching on gravel as he broke into something close to a run. His mind was racing, pulling up memories he had tried for years to file away. Images that still woke him up at night, covered in cold sweat. Callum Drexler. The name came back to him like a prayer, like a curse. The civilian pilot who should not exist in any official record. The man who flew into hell on Christmas Eve when every military pilot had refused. The ghost who saved 12 men and then disappeared. Harding reached the parking lot just as the man was closing the truck door. "Callum Drexler," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The man turned, his body language immediately defensive, protective. "Do I know you?" Harding stepped into the light from a nearby lamppost, his uniform gleaming, his face pale with shock and something that might have been hope. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." The man's expression hardened, walls going up. "I'm leaving. You don't need to escort me out. Your jacket." Harding's voice cracked slightly. "May I see it?" There was a long pause. Inside the truck, the little girl pressed her face against the window, watching with wide, frightened eyes. The man looked at Harding, really looked at him, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or just exhaustion. He nodded once. Harding stepped closer, his hands trembling as he reached out and gently pulled the collar of the worn Carhartt jacket open. The tactical patch was fully visible now under the parking lot lights, faded almost to nothing, but still there, still readable to someone who knew what they were looking for. Silent Night /24. Deck/grid X-ray. Harding's breath caught in his throat, his eyes filled with tears that he did not try to hide. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "It really is you. If you've ever been misjudged based on how you looked, drop a comment below. And if this story is hitting you differently than you expected, consider staying with us. There's so much more to uncover." Cal pulled his jacket closed, stepping back from the Admiral with the careful distance of someone who had learned not to trust sudden recognition. "I don't know what you think you remember, but that was a long time ago." Harding did not move, his eyes still locked on the patch, on the faded letters that represented something most people would never know existed. December 24th, 7 years ago. Syrian border. Cal went very still. His jaw tightened, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face before he locked it down again. That muscle memory of control, of keeping everything buried where it could not hurt him or anyone else. SEAL Team 6 extraction. Harding's voice was steady now, falling into the rhythm of a mission brief, the way soldiers speak when emotion threatens to overwhelm them. 12 men pinned down in a collapsing safe house. Weather grounded every bird in theater. Command called it. Mission abort. The wind picked up, carrying snow across the parking lot in small spiraling patterns. Inside the truck, Bryn had pressed her face fully against the window now, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the Admiral in his gleaming uniform speak to her father. "You flew us out." The words hung in the cold air between them. Cal's hands curled into fists at his sides, then slowly relaxed. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, firm, carrying the weight of someone who had made peace with his choices a long time ago. "I did what anyone would have done." "No!" Harding shook his head, something fierce entering his expression. "You didn't. Because no one else did." A flash of memory hit Cal without warning, the way they sometimes still did. The sound of rotor blades chopping through wind and snow, radio static crackling in his headset. A voice, calm and professional, delivering impossible news. All assets grounded. Repeat, all assets grounded. Weather conditions critical. Enemy fire concentrated. Mission is abort. And his own voice, steady despite everything, despite knowing what he was about to do. "I don't care. I'm going in." The memory faded as quickly as it came, leaving him standing in a snowy parking lot 7 years removed from that Christmas Eve, facing a man whose life he had saved and whose gratitude he had spent years trying to avoid. Every pilot in theater said it was suicide. Harding took a step closer. "You were the only one who said yes, and I'd do it again." The words came out before Cal could stop them, raw and honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be anymore. "I know you would." Harding's expression softened. "That's why I've spent 7 years trying to find you." The sound of footsteps on gravel interrupted them. Todd and several gala attendees were approaching, drawn by the intensity of the conversation they could see but not hear. Felicity still had her phone out, filming now from a more discreet angle. Senator Lionel Harwick walked with the confident stride of someone used to inserting himself into situations. Ensign Teague followed, young and eager, his dress whites crisp and perfect in the lamplight. "What's going on?" Felicity's voice carried a different tone now, less mockery and more genuine curiosity tinged with concern. "Is everything all right?" Harding turned to face them, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. His expression had shifted from emotion to something harder, colder, the face of a man with 3 decades of command experience who had just watched something unforgivable happen. This man was turned away tonight. His voice cut through the small crowd like a blade, mocked, filmed, threatened with police. Senator Harwick cleared his throat. "Admiral, with all due respect, we have protocols for these events, security procedures that... Do you know who he is?" Harding's interruption was surgical, precise. The senator stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still open. Silence spread through the group. Todd shifted his weight, uncomfortable now, sensing that something had fundamentally changed, but not yet understanding what. "Do any of you have any idea who you just humiliated?" The wind carried the question across the parking lot. Inside the truck, Bryn's small hand pressed against the window, leaving a print in the condensation. Todd's voice was defensive, uncertain. He said he was a contractor. He was. Harding stepped closer to the group, his posture military straight, his voice dropping into the cadence of a briefing. "Civilian helicopter. Pilot. Contracted through a DoD Black Site Liaison program most of you don't have clearance to know exists." Felicity lowered her phone slowly, her face paling. "December 24th. Syrian border. SEAL Team 6. Harding's words came faster now, years of suppressed gratitude and rage combining into something powerful. 12 men left behind in a collapsing compound. Every military aircraft in the region was grounded. Weather, enemy fire, command abort. The crowd was completely silent now, even the distant sound of the string quartet from inside the mansion seeming to fade away. This man flew an unarmed MD-500 into a Category 3 storm, through active enemy airspace, 0 support, 0 backup, 0 chance of surviving if he went down. Harding's voice cracked slightly on the last word. 7 years of nightmares bleeding through his professional control. Cal turned away, his shoulders tight with tension, his face carefully blank. This was exactly what he had spent 7 years avoiding. The attention, the gratitude, the weight of being seen as something he had never considered himself to be. He pulled us out. All 12 of us. Harding's voice dropped to something quieter, more personal. I was one of them. Ensign Teague's hand came up slowly to his chest, pressing against his heart. Felicity's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Senator Harwick removed his hat. His earlier certainty completely evaporated. Then why? Felicity's voice was barely a whisper. Why isn't he? She could not finish the question, but everyone understood what she was asking. Why isn't he decorated? Why isn't he wealthy? Why isn't he wearing a uniform covered in medals instead of a torn jacket and salt-stained boots? Harding turned back to Cal, his expression softening into something like grief. Because he refused everything, every medal, every honor, every benefit. He disappeared. Senator Harwick found his voice again, confusion replacing his earlier authority. But why would anyone? Because his wife died 3 months after that mission. The words landed like a physical blow. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. Cancer. Stage 4. And he had a daughter to raise. Every eye in the group shifted to the truck, to the small face pressed against the window, to the child who had watched her father be humiliated and was now watching something she could not yet understand unfold in the lamplight and snow. Harding's voice was gentle now, almost tender. You never cashed the check, did you? Cal did not answer, did not turn around, just stood there with his back to them all, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The Navy sent you $250,000, hazard pay, danger compensation, survivor benefits. Harding paused, letting that number sink in. You never touched it. I didn't do it for money. Cal's voice was so quiet they almost could not hear him. Then what? The question hung in the air for a long moment. When Cal finally turned around, his face was raw with an emotion he usually kept locked away. Because you called, and someone needed to answer. Felicity stepped forward, her hands shaking, mascara already starting to run down her face. I filmed you. I laughed. I'm so sorry. You didn't know. Cal's interruption was gentle, lacking any accusation. That seemed to make it worse somehow. That's not an excuse. Felicity pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling as she pulled up the video she had recorded. She deleted it right there in front of everyone, the small gesture feeling both necessary and utterly inadequate. Todd removed his cap, staring at the ground like he was trying to see through it to somewhere else. Sir, I should have listened. I should have checked more carefully. I'm sorry. Cal nodded once, a small acceptance that did not quite reach forgiveness, but held no anger either. Just exhaustion. Just the weariness of someone who had been fighting this particular battle for 7 years and was tired of winning it. Ensign Teague stepped forward, his young face working through emotions he was clearly struggling to process. What you did, his voice cracked. That's why I enlisted. Stories like yours. That's what made me want to serve. The symbolic weight of the moment settled over them all. Here was the next generation, inspired by a sacrifice that had never been officially acknowledged, standing in front of the man who had made it and finding him worn down by life in ways that had nothing to do with courage. You came here tonight to leave a donation. Harding's statement was not a question. Cal reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled envelope, the one he had carried from the truck, the whole reason for this entire painful evening. He held it out, his hand steady despite everything. It's not much, but I wanted to honor someone. Harding took it carefully, like it was something fragile and precious. He opened it slowly, his fingers gentle on the worn paper. Inside was $47 in cash, mostly singles and fives, a few tens. The kind of money you put together from tips and spare change, from whatever was left over after rent and groceries and keeping a 6-year-old in clothes that fit. And folded beneath the money was a note written on lined paper, torn from a spiral notebook. Harding's voice broke as he read it aloud. In memory of Chief Petty Officer Marcus Lyle, KIA 22nd December. He called me brother. I never got to say goodbye. The Admiral's hands began to tremble, the paper shaking between his fingers. Marcus was in the bird that night. You pulled him out with a shattered femur and a collapsed lung. He lived another 6 years because of you. 6 years with his family. 6 years his daughters got to have their father. Cal's face crumbled. He turned away again, his hand coming up to cover his mouth, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs he tried desperately to control. I heard he didn't make it. I just wanted him to be remembered. The sound of the truck door opening made everyone turn. Bryn had climbed out, her oversized pink coat dragging in the snow as she ran to her father. She wrapped her arms around his leg, pressing her face against his worn jeans, and Cal's hand came down to rest on her dark curls, steadying himself with her presence. Then honor him inside. Harding's voice was firm now, Commander steady. As our guest. Cal shook his head, not looking up. I don't belong in there. You belong in there more than anyone. Harding stepped closer, placing a hand on Cal's shoulder. Callum Drexler. Will you come inside? Cal looked down at Bryn, at her small face turned up toward him, at her eyes still red from crying earlier, but filled now with something like hope. He looked at the Admiral, at the crowd of people who had mocked him and were now staring at him, with expressions ranging from shame to awe to desperate need for forgiveness. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Okay? The walk back to the entrance was silent except for the crunch of snow under their feet. Harding led the way. Cal followed, carrying Bryn now, her arms wrapped tight around his neck. Behind them came the crowd, a procession of witnesses to their own judgment and its reversal. As they reached the red carpet, Ensign Teague snapped to attention, his salute crisp and perfect. Sir, it would be my honor to escort you. Cal nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. They walked together toward the golden light spilling from the mansion's entrance, toward the warmth and music and the hundreds of people inside who did not yet know what was about to happen. Todd held the door open, his earlier authority completely stripped away, replaced with something like reverence. The security guard who had turned Cal away now ushered him through with a small bow of his head. Inside, the gala continued unaware. Officers in dress blues, veterans in suits, donors in gowns. The string quartet played something classical and beautiful. Champagne flowed. Conversations hummed with the comfortable ease of people who belonged. And then the music stopped. Have you ever watched someone's entire world shift in a single moment? Stay with us. What happens next will leave you speechless. And if this story matters to you, let us know in the comments and consider subscribing. Harding raised his voice, commanding the attention of the entire ballroom. Everyone, your attention, please. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet's violinist lifted her bow from the strings. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Hundreds of faces turned toward the entrance where Cal stood holding Bryn, his worn jacket a stark contrast to the elegant surroundings. 7 years ago, on Christmas Eve, 12 Navy SEALs were left behind enemy lines. Harding's voice carried to every corner of the room, trained by decades of addressing troops in the field. Command called the mission. Weather and enemy fire made extraction impossible. Every military pilot refused to fly. He gestured to Cal, and the crowd's eyes followed. This man didn't refuse. Callum Drexler flew an unarmed civilian helicopter into hell and brought us home, all 12 of us. Murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Officers leaned toward each other, whispering. Veterans straightened in their seats. The donors who funded these events watched with growing understanding. He refused every honor, rejected every benefit. And when his wife died months later, he raised his daughter alone, working 3 jobs, living quietly, asking for nothing. Harding's voice cracked on the last word. Tonight, he came here to honor a fallen brother, and we turned him away. The shame in the room was palpable, thick enough to touch. Cal kept his eyes down, Bryn pressed against his chest, feeling every gaze like a physical weight. Harding stepped back, stood at attention, and then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his hand in a formal military salute. Callum Drexler. On behalf of the 12 men you saved and the families who still have them, thank you. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ensign Teague snapped to attention, his hand flying to his brow. One by one, every service member in the room followed. Dozens of hands rose in perfect synchronization. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft sound of snow against windows. Bryn looked up at her father, confused. Daddy, why are they doing that? Cal's voice was thick with tears. Because they're saying, thank you. Harding walked to the front of the hall where a memorial altar stood. Photos of fallen service members surrounding a single unlit white candle. Every year, we light this candle in honor of those who gave everything. Tonight, I ask that it be lit by someone who reminds us what sacrifice truly means. He knelt in front of Bryn. Would you like to light the candle, sweetheart? Bryn looked at Cal. He nodded, kneeling beside her, his voice a whisper. for Marcus. And for Mommy. Bryn stepped forward on unsteady legs. Harding handed her a long match. Her small hand shook as she struck it. The flame caught, bright and warm. She touched it to the wick, and the candle glowed with steady light. Cal stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, the faded patch on his jacket now visible to everyone. Harding stood beside them, hand over his heart. The crowd bowed their heads in silence that felt sacred. Bryn whispered so softly only Cal could hear, "Mommy would be proud of you, Daddy." Cal closed his eyes as tears streamed down his face. As the evening continued, veterans approached one by one. An older man with a cane shook Cal's hand. "My son was on that team. You brought him home to us." A young Marine, voice shaking. "I joined because of stories like yours." Felicity returned with an envelope thick with donations. "This is for Marcus, and for anything Bryn needs." Hours later, as guests departed, Cal and Bryn prepared to leave. Harding walked them to the door. "You know we've been looking for you for 7 years. I didn't want to be found. I know, but you deserve more than this." Cal looked down at Bryn, asleep in his arms. "I have everything I need. The check. It's still waiting, and there are benefits. I'll think about it." Harding smiled. "Merry Christmas, Callum." "Merry Christmas, Admiral." Cal buckled Bryn into the back seat. She stirred, half awake. "Daddy, was tonight good?" Cal smiled through his tears. "Yeah, kiddo, it was good." The engine coughed to life. As they pulled away, Harding and the remaining crowd stood at the entrance watching. A young officer saluted as the truck disappeared into the snowy night, its cracked taillight fading into the darkness like a memory that refuses to be forgotten. Callum Drexler never wanted recognition. He never asked for thanks. He just showed up when it mattered most and disappeared when the cameras turned on. But on Christmas Eve, in front of the people who judged him, his sacrifice was finally seen. Because sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who saved us all. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Share their story in the comments. And if this moved you, pass it on. Heroes like Callum deserve to be remembered.